This video gets into gun safety. If you want to understand better what I'm saying, you probably should watch the first video that I published a few days ago. Um, but this is the one where you've watched that video and you've thought about it and you think, yeah, I'm probably going to go ahead and buy a gun. Uh, I'm going to walk through gun safety training, and included in that, the first part here is why your gun safety training is probably inadequate and incorrect. The gun safety training that's out there that I've seen and gotten anyway assumes a lot of things that you don't have to assume and shouldn't. I see trainers that are coming from the military, from police academy, from hunter safety courses, and there are a few assumptions there. One is they're assuming the presence of a gun. They're assuming that you've already decided to buy one, that there's necessarily going to be one. And in my first video, I walked you through the fact and the possibility that you don't have to own one, and maybe you're not the right person. I'm not going to go over all that again, but number one, don't assume that you have to have one, and that can change. That the best gun safety thing you can do, if we're just talking about safety, is to not have one, and if that's you, put yourself in that category. Number two, these trainers are coming from particular contexts. If they're a military gun safety trainer or a military trainer, they're learning that in the context of the military. They're teaching people how to use guns in the context of the military. The military is a colossal system that has all sorts of backup, infrastructure, access to all kinds of information, people whose whole job it is to make sure that the weapons are held in safe places. They have multiple installations where they can keep the child care over in one location and store the guns over in a different location. That's a context in which people use guns. Is it your home? No. Same thing for the police academy. It's closer to a context where you might be likely to use a gun, but bottom line, teaching police how to use a gun as police officers. Are you a police officer? Maybe some people watching are, but my presentation here, at least this part of it, is really intended for people who are not police recruits or police officers. If you're not that, and a police officer has trained you how to use a gun or keep a gun safe, keep in mind that that person's training is coming from the context where, when they were taught, it was assumed that the people who were listening were police officers. Your safety needs may not exactly match up. Same thing for hunting. I won't go over it all again, but you get it. There's an assumption about what the purpose of having the gun is. And I'll give you one more example. Maybe the reason you own a gun is that you inherited a family heirloom. What kind of gun safety strategy might you use? Well, look, if that's a family heirloom, a great place to store it is a safety deposit at a bank. Now, that doesn't make any sense for a military trainer, so they're not going to think of that. They're not going to tell you that. It doesn't make any sense for a police officer whose daily work involves carrying a gun, so that wasn't included in their training either. Hunter safety, yeah, maybe, but frankly, I haven't heard it in the hunter safety training that I've gone through. So my point here is to look at the training you got and think about the background of the person who's training you, because there's what most people get is the second layer of gun safety training, where somebody has already made a series of assumptions about what the purpose is and what the tactics are, what the strategies are, and they're teaching you from the context of already having made a bunch of decisions. Actual gun safety starts up here, where you rethink, why do you have a gun at all? What's the purpose? Why do you have a cat? What's the purpose of having a gun? And think through whether you need one, how you plan to use it. Don't assume these things, because this is your home, this is you, this is your life. You have or are planning to acquire a tool that is extremely powerful and life-changing. And it's up to you as a functioning, competent adult to think through why you have it, how you're going to use it, and make sure that you get the consequences you want, not the consequences you don't want. If you're just following somebody else's instructions, you're not acting as a fully competent adult who thinks through not just what somebody else tells you, but realizing that they're just another adult who may be coming in with some assumptions that don't apply to you. Okay, so what's this top level gun safety strategy? Number one, the way to think about it is there could be an incident in which you use a gun. All right, that's the center of the process. So that's your goal, is to be prepared for whatever that circumstance is. That's why you might have this tool. So maybe your goal is to shoot a deer. Maybe your goal is home safety. Whatever it is, you have this imagined moment where a gun is likely to be useful in accomplishing what you need. The first thing you do is you go all the way over and you start to think about the context that you're creating. And if your goal is home safety, I'm going to focus on that. Think about the context of home safety, because there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of things you can do to increase your home safety. If you want to make sure that you don't get attacked in the middle of the night, how safe is your door? Do you, for example, have a deadbolt? You can walk through all sorts of things that you can do to make your home more safe. Is your spouse not safe? Maybe your spouse is attacking you. Well, maybe you should get out of the house instead of buying a gun. If somebody's coming to your house and making you feel unsafe there, it is an entirely reasonable thing to move. I know that's expensive, but if you make the wrong choice there, you could end up in prison for life. And it's better to take the cost of moving rather than ending up in prison for life for having made the wrong decision. This video could get impossibly long if I walk through all of the possibilities, but what I'm getting at is figure out whatever your goal is, whatever the imagined bad scenario is, go back to the context that you create on a daily basis and think, how do I make my life a life in which that bad event never happens? How do I change this context so that the situation where I'm holding a gun and thinking about using it on a person in that moment, you don't want to get there. You might get there, and that's step two. But step one is do everything you can to figure out a way so that you're not in a situation that you're looking at another human being and thinking that you're going to use a gun on them. Avoid that at almost all costs. All right, step two. This is the moment when you're contemplating using a gun. This is where your gun training comes in, and I'm not going to try to repeat all of that, but the goal here is to achieve the goal, but also minimize the harm. So what you don't want to do is have someone pop through your door, you shoot them dead, and then you realize it's a house cleaner. That they didn't pop through the door. There was somebody knocking on the door, somebody up in a suburb of Indianapolis here, for good reasons or bad, thought that the house cleaner was somehow a threat. They shot through the door, killed the woman, who again was just somebody hired to clean a house who had the wrong address. You don't want to be that person. Think whatever you want about them, and the trial's ongoing. We'll see what the law says about it. But your goal is to, first of all, create a context where that's not going to happen. Their door was locked. I don't know why they didn't just rely on their door lock and call the police. They pretty well screwed up on that count. But number two, you need to figure out how you're going to use a gun in a way that minimizes the harm in the moment. One example is the rule of gun safety, where know your target and whatever is behind it. So even if you see a person and you have decided on rational reasons that you're going to shoot that person, if what you have is a rifle, you need to know what's behind that person, because when you shoot that person, it's going to go straight through them into the next whatever's behind them. If you're shooting into a crowd, you're likely to kill 2, 3, 4 people, maybe. Um, that's the during. And then after, there are a variety of consequences: medical, legal, financial. Gun safety requires thinking about how to prepare and minimize the harm there. So there are 3 steps here. Number 1, figure out how not to have to use it at all. Step 2 is learn to use it correctly so that you do the thing you want and not the things you don't want to do. And number 3 is understanding that there are going to be consequences afterwards. And I forgot to say, psychological. Shooting someone, being around someone who's shot, if your children or spouse are present at the time that you do this, they will probably also have psychological consequences, as well as uh, you might blow out their eardrums. There's serious consequences. So think about how to minimize and deal with those consequences. Figuring this out for your context, in your home, in your state, with your family, that's what makes a gun safety plan. It's not just finding somebody who is trained by some institution somewhere and following that institution's advice. You can take that in. I think you should go to those classes. I think you should listen to those people, but take it in as a thinking adult and adapt it to your situation and understand that not all of it may apply and you may need to add things. They can only provide you so much information in whatever amount of time they have. Maybe it's a day of training, maybe it's 1 hour. They can only explain so much to you, and this is your whole life. If you use a gun wrong, it's your whole life. Give it more time than that. Another thing to have in mind is what you need to do to store a gun. As an example, what you need to do to store a gun safely when you have an infant in the house is one set of behaviors. That same gun and that same child 15 years later, you need to do different things. You need to think about that gun differently, because your life isn't static. The gun safety tactics that you use are not static. They change over time, including you. You change over time. And the gun safety things you need to do this year are not going to be the same things you need to do 15 years from now. So it's not just a formula that you pick up and apply once and you're done. That's not how it works. You have to think about it on an ongoing basis. That's the real gun safety process. And if nobody told you that before, they were giving you, at best, an abbreviated version. All right, in that context, depending on what your goals are, I also want to add another aspect, and that is the social contract. We have a social contract in which we have law enforcement, and law enforcement, and for the most part military, are going forward with the expectation that you will cooperate with what they're doing because you have a rational belief that you will survive participating in their demands. Now, yes, they have ways to enforce compliance from people who are unwilling, but their initial strategy is built as they build their gun safety and their strategies for what they're going to do. They're assuming that you want to survive the incident, and that's good. This is what we want. We want to have a system where law enforcement is rational, where cooperating with law enforcement is rational. So, for example, if you have committed some sort of minor infraction, you get pulled over for having a bad tail light or running a stop sign, we need, if law enforcement is going to work in this country, we need to have a system where you don't have a reason to think that if you get pulled over by police and cooperate with them, that you're going to get tortured to death. If that falls apart, law enforcement strategy falls apart. And that's a bad situation for everyone involved. Because if you have a rational thought, if you have good reason to think that cooperating with police means that you will be, for example, held in a cell, strapped into a chair with a mask, and then tear gas will be sprayed into that mask until you die, you have a rational reason at that point. If that's what cooperating with law enforcement gets you, you might consider not cooperating with them. You might decide that you'd rather die than be strapped into a chair and killed slowly with tear gas. If you know that you're going to be raped in prison, if the conditions of being in prison are so terrible that people get raped to death in prison in this country, that might be a rational reason why you might decide not to cooperate with law enforcement when they come for you. I could go on, but today's February 7th of 2026. We are watching law enforcement, particularly ICE, but not only ICE, ratchet up a series of illegal and increasingly violent consequences on people who have done extremely trivial things like working a minimum wage job without the proper papers. Look, I get it. I understand why completely open borders don't work, but also I understand that deciding to work without proper authorization is not a reason to torture someone to death. And if we start putting people in the position, including Americans, because these ICE agents aren't making sure that they're taking Americans into custody and putting them in the same torturous conditions that they're putting immigrants in. So this is all of us. We're all in this situation where law enforcement is ratcheting up these incredibly violent and illegal acts. And that changes the entire decision space of the populace. We have a social contract where you cooperate with law enforcement because they follow the law and they behave rationally. That is changing, and we need to change it back. It's a failure of leadership. Law enforcement leadership is deciding to ratchet up violence and criminal acts by law enforcement officers. And that puts the frontline guys in far more danger, and it's not limited to ICE. Law enforcement is choosing how to engage with the populace, and they are choosing to engage with the populace by committing crimes against us at incredible levels of violence. And that changes the decision space for the entire population. Now, if you're listening to this, you might be having feelings. And to be clear, all I am saying is that this gun safety protocol applies to all of us, the population and law enforcement. And if you're going to look at me for advice, first of all, understand I already told you, don't listen to one guy no matter what training they are. And it's, for most people watching this video, I'm probably just some dude on the internet. Don't just take my advice. But what my advice is go back to step one and think, what is the context in which we can avoid the need for a gun? That's the actual gun safety moment where most things are solved. We should all go there and figure out strategies and tactics that allow us to avoid confrontations in which guns are needed at all. That's where problems get solved. And yes, number two, we should engage in ways that minimize the harm in the moment and engage in ways that minimize the aftermath. All of these things apply across the board. What I am saying is, this country has 500 million guns. And if we're going to get along with each other and not all walk in rivers of blood, above all, we need to go back to that step one and look at what the goals are and what strategies we're trying to apply, and make sure that we're doing all the things over here that don't require a gun, that get people to cooperate in ways that don't involve guns. Let's all live over there. Because step two is always going to be grim. Let's avoid it.